Little kitty just sitting on my lap here. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you guys about what's going on across Canada right now. And really, it's a quiet war that's happening. And there are people that are losing this war, and those people are the working class. And I just think it's important for all of us to understand what's going on if we value freedom and our autonomy and our ability to pay our bills and put food on the table, because there's this growing system of globalist racketeering like corruption in this country, and it's driven primarily by ideological means, but it is multifaceted. And so I think we should just break it down a bit, because we all work way too damn hard to be taken advantage of. And most people don't have time to dig into this stuff, right? We work all day, we come home to our families, our kids are in sports, and by the end of the day we're just exhausted. So politics and corruption investigations aren't exactly in the top of the list probably for most people. So I'm not going to go super deep here, but I just want to hit on the big issues, because policies and trade deals are being signed and environmental rules are being written, and the people paying the biggest price are almost always working Canadians. The welders, the truck drivers, the oil field workers, the factory workers, the tradesmen, and not just blue collar, like customer service staff and clerical workers and retail employees and office workers and technicians and nurses and teachers and anybody earning a paycheck. And we're just getting crushed by taxes and inflation eating our paychecks, rising grocery prices, housing costs, fuel, and just constant interference from Ottawa. It just feels like we're working harder and harder just to stay afloat. And we are. Just the people who are building things, the people who are moving things and fixing things and helping to keep this country running. So I want to talk about Windsor, Ontario, because what's happening there right now is kind of telling a much bigger story. So Windsor's been the beating heart of Canada's auto industry for decades, and entire communities there have been built around it. There's factories and tool and die shops and machine shops and engineering firms and robotics companies and parts suppliers and thousands of skilled trade jobs supporting the local economy. And recently Canada opened the door for cheaper Chinese electric vehicles to come into the country. And on paper it sounded like a small change, but in the real world, the effects of that ripple through the entire supply chain. Like one Windsor toolmaker, Jan Engineering, they reported a loss of 70% of business and laying off workers already. Factories are slowing down and parts suppliers are scrambling. And 70% is not a small slowdown. Like, that is catastrophic for a manufacturing company. And when that happens across dozens of suppliers in the same region, the entire industrial community begins to collapse. And no surprise, it lines the pockets of the financial elite. Firms like Brookfield have poured tens of billions of dollars into renewable energy and EV infrastructure and battery supply chains and green investment funds that depend on governments forcing a rapid transition away from traditional industries. Mark Carney has deep ties to Brookfield and the global financial world behind these investments. So when policies squeeze manufacturing, oil and gas, and they push EVs and green infrastructure, the money just doesn't disappear. It just shifts. And the layoffs hit, and the returns land in the investment portfolios. And if you live in Alberta, this pattern probably seems kind of familiar, because we've been watching it happen to our energy sector for quite a while. Carbon taxes and pipeline cancellations and emissions caps and tanker bans and endless regulatory red tape, all squarely aimed at industries that employ hundreds of thousands of working Canadians. And the people making these decisions rarely live with the consequences. I've actually worked in places where those decisions show up in the real world. Places like most Canadians probably will never visit, places like Norman Wells up in the Northwest Territories. I worked on a pipeline replacement project up there in 2018, and I realized how small and how, fragile that these communities can be, because food was unbelievably expensive. I remember seeing like a loaf of bread, it was like $8 or $12 a loaf or something like that, because Norman Wells sits up by the Arctic Circle, right? So they have to have their supplies flown in, and during the winter, they have to build ice roads that cross frozen rivers and muskeg. And towns like that only exist for one reason, and that's resource jobs. Oil and pipelines and energy infrastructure are the backbone of the entire community. And without it, that town just doesn't shrink, it disappears. And right now, Norman Wells is facing exactly that moment. Imperial Oil plans to shut down production in the oil field this month. And yes, the oil field is old, its production has been declining. But when companies decide whether to reinvest in projects, they don't just look at geology, they look at the entire political climate. And in Canada today, that climate sends a clear message, which is you are not welcome here. And when that message becomes loud enough, capital moves and investment disappears, and projects that might have been expanded or replaced simply just never happen. And when that investment leaves, it doesn't hurt the political class, it hurts the working class. And families end up leaving, and local businesses lose customers, and municipal tax base collapses. Entire communities just slowly hollow out. And meanwhile, billions of dollars are redirected into solar and wind and EV infrastructure and green investment funds, exactly the sectors where firms like Brookfield have already built massive portfolios. So while resource towns lose their economic backbone and energy workers lose stable careers, the financial class sits on the other side of the policy shift, collecting all the returns. And housing might be the clearest example of them all. Canada is bringing now well over 1 million immigrants into the year, which is basically an invasion at this point. When you combine all the permanent residents and the temporary foreign workers and the international students, while housing construction lags far behind population growth, and demand explodes and supply struggles to keep up. And what happens to the prices? They skyrocket. And for young Canadians and working families, that means homeownership is drifting further and further out of reach, and rent is swallowing bigger shares of their paychecks every month. But for massive asset managers like Brookfield, soaring housing demand isn't a crisis, it's a business model. Rising rents and rising land values and rising returns for large institutional investors. And this is where politics and finance start overlapping in ways that should make Canadians more pissed off than paying $15 for a beer at a hockey game. Because Mark Carney spent years at the top of the global finance and has deep ties to Brookfield. And it's one of the most powerful investment firms on the planet. And this corporation aggressively has positioned itself to profit from the global green transition, pouring billions into renewable energy and infrastructure. And investment that depends on governments pushing capital away from oil and gas. And that's the quiet transfer that's happening behind the scenes. Working class industries just get regulated and taxed and phased out while the financial class pivots to the new policy favored investments and collects the returns. And meanwhile, Ottawa virtue signals through endless green policies while doing nothing about the environmental problems that we actually do have. And did you know that Canada produces only about 1.5% of global carbon emissions, while China produces 30%? The same country that we're increasingly buying their EVs and solar panels and wind turbines and batteries from. So we shut down our industries, we tax our energy sector, and send billions of dollars overseas buying green technology, and those profits help fund the construction of hundreds of new coal plants in China. Think about that. We're told Canadians must accept higher energy costs and fewer jobs in the name of climate policy, while the country manufacturing most of the world's green technology continues expanding the largest coal fleet on the planet. If the global elitists were truly interested in protecting the environment, we'd see way different priorities. We'd see massive investment in cleaning plastic out of the oceans. Right now, between somewhere in 8 and 23 million tons of plastic enters the ocean every year, roughly a garbage truck of trash every minute. And that pollution is choking marine life and is destroying the fishing industries that feed families and support coastal economies. Ghost fishing gear alone kills hundreds of thousands of whales and dolphins and seals every year. So if the goal was truly environmental protection, that's where serious global action could probably be focused. But instead we get carbon taxed, we get subsidies for imported solar panels and policies that hollow out domestic industries while enriching massive global investment funds in countries like China. And while ordinary Canadians are facing rising housing costs and higher energy bills and expensive groceries and shrinking opportunities in traditional industries, the same policy environment creates enormous enormous upside for asset managers positioned on the other side of that green transition. And for the working class, it is a decline. For the financial elite, it is just another asset category. And that's the divide that's happening in Canada's economy. Not just a shift in energy, but a shift in who captures the wealth. And none of this means that the future is hopeless, but it does mean that Canadians need to start paying closer attention to how those decisions are being made and who benefits from them. Because behind every energy policy decision, there are financial interests. And when people start looking past the slogans and following the money, the conversation changes. And real change just doesn't start in Parliament. It starts in living rooms. It starts in coffee shops. It starts in the job site. It starts in community halls. And when ordinary Canadians begin asking questions about the policies that are shaping their lives. And this country is built on people who believe in hard work and abundant resources and the freedom to build a better life for their families. And I don't think that spirit has disappeared for sure, but preserving it should be the goal. And it requires something that many people have grown uncomfortable with in recent years, and that is speaking up. Because when we stay silent, power concentrates. But when people become informed and engaged and willing to challenge the direction of their country, the balance can shift. So, as always, I encourage you to speak up. Even right now, just drop a comment in the comment section. Let everyone know how you feel. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you'd like more content like this, then just drop a like on the video, subscribe, and don't miss the next one. Oh, and if you haven't seen my video about the government taking away our firearms, click this video right here. It's well on its way to 60,000 views, I think. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome. Talk soon.